Well, it's a little bit of a time for true confession this morning. As you may know, I grew up in a household where there were 6 of us children. And it was always a raucous and noisy place, as you might imagine. And every once in a while, when we had a bad weather day and we were all at home together, my mother would be in charge because my dad was at work. And at some point during the day, my mother would say, "Now you kids have to behave. I've just about reached my limit." I was amazed that so often she said it, but never seemed to reach it. Although there were occasions. For example, we had one of those old phones that used to hang on the wall with a long cord. I knew just how far that cord would reach. So my mother would get a phone call from a friend, and they would be chatting away, and my mother would say something, "Well, I didn't know that." And I'd be standing just out of reach, and I'd say, "Well, I didn't know that." And then my mother would say something else like, "Well, we'll get together soon." And I'd say, "We'll get together soon." And that would go on for just a certain amount of time. And then my mother would say, "Could you hold on a minute?" I knew that was time to beat a hasty retreat because my mother had in fact reached her limit. I would run to the back bedroom, slide under the bed to the very farthest corner, because I knew the broom couldn't reach that far. And sure enough, that thing would go swish, swish, swish. I tried not to laugh, but unfortunately I did, and it didn't seem to help much. But my mother would eventually give up and go back to the phone. Now listen, when you're a kid, I would go back and stand right there again. I did give up after 2 swishes under the bed. But I wonder why God never reaches his limit. You ever think about that? Human beings often are pushed to the point where they seem to feel like they've gone as far as they can go and they can't go any further. Sometimes it's in negotiations about an issue or a concern. Sometimes it's in conversation with a friend or a family, and the expectations get so great that you can't really just embrace them. You have to say, "That's enough, I can't go any farther," or "I have reached my limit." I think about this too when I look at sometimes the athletic programs of which our kids are so often a part. I remember just in my own life, when you just think you're so tired you can't do another thing, the coach gives you another directive and expects you to respond to it. And inside you're saying to yourself, "Oh, I've done all I can do. I'm done." And yet somehow, because everybody else is moving in that same direction, you make one more attempt at it. Remember any times when you have said, "I've reached my limit"? It's a human sort of response to situations and circumstances where we feel we've done all we can, we just can't go any further. I thought about that when I read the gospel readings for this Sunday celebration, the gift of love. You ever wonder why God hasn't reached God's limit? Think about the journeys of our lives, how sometimes we are filled with faith and dedication, and we offer ourselves, and then there are those times when we just seem to be wandering in a wilderness. We seem to be somehow out of touch with what really matters in terms of our spiritual well-being and the journey we're on as a people of God. And yet, God does not reach his limit. The gift of the Christ child was an expression to the world that whatever happens in this world, God is not going to abandon it, and God is not going to give up on it. You know, it's interesting that we talk about love a lot during the Christmas season. But sometimes we fail to recognize what a powerful force that can be for betterment in this world, in our interpersonal relationships, in the places where we work and the places where we recreate, the neighborhoods in which we live. We live in a world that sadly seems to be so disconnected, and neighbors no longer know neighbors, for example. I can remember as a child my grandfather sitting on the front porch after chores were done, and people who would come by would stop and they would talk and they would visit. They would connect. But we live in a different world today. And to connect takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of intention. It doesn't somehow just automatically happen. My father in Iowa used to live next to an older gentleman, and they both would grow gardens. And my father would always try to outdo Mr. Spielman. And so they would both plant tomatoes. And then as things went along, my dad would walk over and he would look at Mr. Spielman's garden and his tomato plants. Not doing too well, are they, Mr. Spielman? And then he'd come back and look at his. And then just about the time when the green tomatoes should ripen, my dad would buy one at the store and hook it on his tomato plant. And then he would say to Mr. Spielman, "Hey, come on over here and look at this." And then Mr. Spielman would say, "You're cheating." But they were connected. You see what I'm saying? There's a sense of bonding that takes place when we connect with each other. That makes a difference in the way we see life and the way we live life. The world we live in today is so dispersed that it's difficult, and we have to be more intentional about connecting. Because as you think about how and where your families live today, if you have a family, many times they are dispersed all over the world in different places. So how do we maintain connection? Where is the major connection of our lives? Even at a distance, love connects us. Even at a distance, people who know they are loved feel connected. And isn't that really what this faith journey is about? That God is connected to us. God is not going to abandon or forsake us. And as we celebrate the gift of love, which is this particular Sunday of Advent, it's a time to remind ourselves that we indeed are loved. God cares about us. God has made a commitment to us that is not going to waver or weaken as time goes by. As much as we may wander in the wildernesses of life, God is always present to us. God is always waiting for us. God is always willing to come to us and be with us. And there is no greater way to celebrate the birth of the Christ than to know that the presence of Christ is with us every single day. God, you see, is willing to stretch the limits. You can't limit God. You can't say God only goes this far and then that's the end of it. The biblical message is a message that God is without limit when it comes to loving us, caring about us. And the extent to that limit is seen not just in the birth, but in the life and the ministry of Jesus, and in the final days of his earthly existence, offering himself as a gift of love for the sake of the world, and for my sake and your sake. Because in Jesus Christ, we see what he meant when he said, "I am come that you might have the fullness of life." The full life. And all that it was meant to be. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, God wants your life to be full and complete. And that's what love enables us to have and to experience. So friends, not only are we given this gift, but we're asked to pass it on. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Can any greater love be given? asked us to love one another, even as he has loved us. And that means one another. It doesn't mean only those who love us. For he said, what does it profit you if you love only those who love you? It's a reciprocal thing. Not that it's unimportant, but it's a reciprocal thing. But when you love those who are unlovely, when you love those who may mistreat or abuse, when you somehow understand that by loving you have the potential to create that which has been absent before love. That's the power of this season. That is the power that Jesus Christ wants us to have in all our lives. I'm thankful, friends, that my mother never really reached her limit. Because when it was over, it was over. And I knew she loved me still. I'm thankful, friends, that God's love has no limit. I have been loved by God and cared for by God, and I think you have too. May the love of God, as we see it in Jesus Christ, be with us every single day of our earthly existence.